It's not every day that you get to drive a car that might arguably change the car industry forever. And I know that sounds very melodramatic, but what makes an EV boring to car enthusiasts? Well, it's typically the single speed or the 2-speed with no sound and not a lot of engagement. Well, Hyundai said, hold on. Maybe we can fix this. With a bunch of clever engineering and a bunch of technology, they have created arguably the most fun EV vehicle ever created. Simulating an 8-speed transmission that's incredibly convincing, with multiple different engine sounds in order to make you feel like you're driving a combustion engine, which sounds very corny. So what's the Hyundai Ioniq 5N actually like? And does it deliver on the promise of high engagement EVs? Let's talk about it. Come drift into a different dimension at Caffeine Octane Linear Raceway for Cosmic Drift on October 26, 2024 with LED lights, visuals, lasers, music, and so much more. Driver sign up and tickets are on sale now, and I really hope to see you there. Hello, David here. Welcome to the Hyundai Ioniq 5N. Somewhat controversial to many people from the outside point of view, but this car, pretty much with all of my colleagues in the industry, got absolutely rave reviews because they said it was arguably the most fun they've ever had in an EV. And so what they did was they use speakers. And I know you probably don't like me saying that out loud, but trust me, it all works in a very particular way. So what they did was they took an EV, they said, okay, how do we give people frame of reference for speed, engagement, and something that they're used to, including on, driving on track or taking corners quickly or anything like that. Because when you drive an EV fast, like, they all kind of do the same thing. EVs are incredibly hard to review for me because they all kind of drive similar. They're all kind of like one-trick ponies in a lot of ways. My favorite EV is, at the moment, before this review, the Porsche Taycan Turbo S, but that costs as much as a house. This is essentially tricking your brain and lying to you to say that it has an 8-speed transmission that has paddle shifters and it has a whole bunch of different modes, and it actually has so much customization it's kind of hard to keep up with the first time you get in it. Okay, so here we also have one of the coolest 360 cameras I've ever seen. And even, oh my God, even the wheels turn. So here you'll notice there's a ton of different options here. The drift mode, and then everything else shows you all the data you ever need to know. But what you're hearing right now is not a combustion engine. It is the speakers where they have strategically placed them and used different resonance and recordings to make it feel like you're driving kind of something with a combustion engine, like an N car, like an Elantra N. But it does sound kind of corny when you hear it on paper, but when you're driving it around at first, it truly does feel like you're driving an Elantra N or a Veloster N or something like that, except it's all-wheel drive, has over 600 horsepower and over 500 foot-pounds of torque. Okay. And did you see that? So I instinctively downshifted for the next corner, not even thinking that I'm in an EV. At first, you're kind of like, okay, you're gonna have to work for it, Hyundai. You're gonna have to really convince me subconsciously, right, that I'm not driving just a single gear EV. But they've really put in a ton of effort into the interface, the interior. I love the interior. I love the steering wheel. I love this cupboard they have in the center console to store all your stuff. And it turns in wonderfully. It's all-wheel drive. You can have a ton of torque distribution. So there's a drift mode, right? You can put all the power to the back. There's also an in-grin boost, which essentially gives you all the power. But by doing that, it turns the speakers off and all that kind of stuff because it needs all of that power to happen all at once. And it has a red line and a rev limiter. So if I get on it and I'm a doofus and I want to be a Honda hot boy and hit the limiter, I can. Also, there's a whole bunch of features on the screen itself. You can actually find a bunch of racetracks on it that will show you the GPS and the time and all that. So if I do the stupid thing and hit the limiter, this is what happens, okay? This is so weird. This is so weird. I am completely flabbergasted by how my brain is kind of reacting to it, because I want to be a hater, right? Internally, I'm like, no, I'm a hardcore car guy and I like combustion motors and all that stuff. But this is bringing the benefits of a combustion engine to an EV when it comes to making it really fun. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So there's been a ton of engineering to simulate that feeling, right? Of I'm going around a track or I'm on a back road, and in my peripheral vision, it has a shift light, right? It has all the things we're all used to over these years. And the 8-speed gives you a nice thunk. And, you know, I say 8-speed in quotations, right? But it gives you a nice thunk to give you that satisfying, like you are driving a transmission, right? Not kind of a direct drive kind of system. But no, it is really impressive. In the turn-in, you have to think this thing's like 4,500 pounds or something like that. But the center of gravity is a lot lower, so it really doesn't matter too much. So the torque management is probably the most impressive thing about this car because of how they fool your brain into thinking it's combustion. So if I put it in the other in mode, watch this. So I'll downshift. So strange. I'm sure a lot of viewers who are watching are going, I still don't buy it, but you can't really capture this on camera. I definitely am impressed with how they've done the audio engineering. I think that's the best way to put it. But there's also 2 other sounds that are, I guess you could say it has to be according to your taste, but I definitely want to try them out. So the one we're in is the one that simulates kind of the combustion and the engine itself that we're all used to. The next one's called the Evolution, which is like an F1 car essentially. So, okay. All right, so we're in Evolution mode. Interesting. See, almost nobody when they did their review of this car turned this mode on or the next one. Evolution is weird because it has that like crazy high revving, you know, V8 or V10 sound from an F1 style car. That's so weird. Brakes are good. They do the job. All right, and then there's Supersonic, which is supposed to be like a jet. So let's try this one. Okay, so not a lot happens at low RPM, but I'm assuming everything's gonna happen at high RPM. Hey, by the way, I have been beating on this thing and I've only lost 2% of charge. Pretty impressive. Okay, it's got this kind of eerie spool up boy. I feel like I'm about to take off in a 747. This is so weird. Okay, for the silly factor, I think I'm gonna go with Evolution. For the functional factor, I'm gonna go with Ignition, I think. Yeah, Evolution just makes you feel way cooler than you are. But it's so natural shifting these paddles. By the way, the paddles are nice too, side note. So let's go back to Ignition. And now we're back in car. Feels like car again. You can, like I said, you can turn a whole bunch of nannies off everything, but there's actually coolant reservoirs. So unlike a combustion engine, you know, you're changing your oil, changing everything else, you do have to check your coolant on this. Oh yeah, it definitely shifts harder in Ignition mode as well. It keeps like throwing me off too. I keep forgetting it does that. But yeah, I mean, you have to think 600 horsepower is no joke, especially when it's immediate. You know what it kind of feels like? It feels like I'm driving a really fast, tuned up hot hatch. But what I will say is I think Hyundai has done pretty amazing things the past 10 years. I think it's really smart of them for leaning into this crazy cyberpunk styling and doing it right. Like a lot of people say, the Ioniq 5 actually does Cybertruck better than Cybertruck in a lot of ways. It's got cleaner body lines, it looks futuristic. I am just too curious. I'm gonna hit the in-grin boost. Jeez, I ran out of road. That is insane. Okay, so that was with all the power, and it acted way more like a traditional EV. It's just really incredible that you would spend tens of thousands of dollars on a lot of different modified cars 15 years ago to even get close to the point of this thing. Because the price point of this thing does scare people, right? I mean, a base of the base model is like 66 grand, and this one was around 70. It's not a cheap car by any means. The more I drive it, I think the more I lean into it. Right, the more I'm leaning into it and saying, I accept this, right? I accept that I'm driving this the way I would a combustion vehicle. It's got Pirelli P0s. The wheels are pretty big on this thing, so you don't have a lot of sidewall. So I don't know if tire options are gonna be limited for this thing, but the P0s are doing the trick today. But you also have to talk about, of course, the big screen. It's very similar to what they have in the Elantra N, but for the functionality of this, where you're constantly changing modes and sounds, right? And then you go back to this. You go back to being a 747. It is way more practical to have a user interface like this, right? Where it can just constantly change. Even with a bunch of the nannies off, it really keeps its composure. And according to other journalists who have driven this on track, right, they can make it oversteer and make it do all this really cool stuff and keep it in control. A lot of the times when you drive an EV super hard, they kind of fall apart, right? When it comes to performance, they are really good in a straight line, but this thing checks pretty much all the car guy boxes. Once you kind of suspend your disbelief, right, and just realize that Hyundai was trying to give you a product that really kept you engaged and keeps you having fun, like, it really does an effective job. The torque management is what makes it convincing. I think the sound and everything is really impressive. There's no doubt about that. But to me, what really sells it is how it puts the power down. Because you have to think, it progressively comes on. It's not like an EV, well, okay, it still smacks you in the face pretty good. That's not what I'm saying. But it still puts it down in that turbocharged, flowy way. I don't know, I'm kind of a fan of the Evolution one. I like it, I think it's kind of neat. It's a different driving experience, right? Because even if you are used to the combustion one, maybe it's because I'm spoiled rotten and I've driven so many combustion vehicles. Like, sure, if you're gonna use speakers, at least make it wacky, you know what I mean? Would you like a Dyson, sir? Probably the only one who loves that one. If you blindfolded somebody and they were not a car person, and told them you're gonna take them for a ride in a cool sports car, they'd probably be convinced. They'd probably be convinced that this was a combustion vehicle. And that's really impressive on Hyundai's part. Another thing I'd like to add is, sure, if I downshift, you know, I get the sauce, I get the horsepower, I get the burbles, just like I would, just like that. However, say I'm going up a hill, and if you were in a normal EV, you would just step on it and everything would be hunky-dory. With this, if you upshift to say 7th or 8th gear, like you shouldn't in a combustion vehicle going up a steep hill, it will lug it out. It will basically put the engine, quote unquote, under load. basically saying, hey, doofus, you need to downshift. And I like that. They've thought of everything. I think the amount of thought put into this system, instead of it just being a gimmick, like on paper, this looks like a gimmick. I have to admit it, just like you guys probably assume. Here, I'll do it right now. I'm gonna turn around, I'm gonna go up a hill, and I'm gonna show you. Be stupid. We're gonna go as high as we can. Let's see what, 8th. That's full throttle. And it's giving you that struggle rumble that a combustion would right now. I'd be like, dude, what are you doing to me? I was excited about this car when they announced it, but I still was not sure how it was going to go, per se. I think this is an engineering feat by Hyundai. Even if you aren't a fan of it, which I could completely understand if you haven't experienced it yet, and it seems kind of hokey, kind of weird. From my perspective, this solves a lot of the EV-ism. You have to think, EVs are incredibly fast, right? But it just turns people off because of the lack of engagement. There's no sound, there's no anything. To me, like I said earlier in this video, the biggest conclusion I have gotten from this experience was a frame of reference. When you drive an EV very fast, your brain doesn't really know what to do sometimes if you're not super experienced in it. Because you'll be at the top of the red line in a single gear going, is this right? I don't know if this is right. Am I going too fast? Am I entering the corners too slow? This really delivers on being able to drive an EV sports car in a very effective way. I love it. It's cool. I mean, it checks a lot of people's daily driver box. It checks a lot of people's enthusiast box, and that's all I got to say about that. And on that note, what do you guys think about the Ioniq 5N? Did I convince you? Did I not convince you? Put it down in the comment section below, and I will see you guys next time. Take it easy. Goodbye.